Hello and welcome back to Cult Leader. I'm your cult leader, Spencer Henry, and this week has been a cold one. We're coming fresh off an ice storm. It's been absolutely taxing, to say the least, here in Nashville. I am all bundled up. Got the dogs in here. They're all bundled up. We actually just got to our house right now. I came to check on it and make sure that none of the pipes burst. Nothing was going on at the house. And luckily, I was alerted by a neighbor. When I got here, power has been on for about 30 minutes. And so I took a nice hot shower, made myself a little espresso, cracked open a cold Diet Coke, and I'm sitting here recording the episode before I go get our stuff from the hotel. But today's story is actually very Nashville centric. This is a case that I have truly never heard anybody talk about before. Never seen any inklings of it online. And trust me, I looked. The other night, I dove headfirst into the newspaper archives, just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling through late 1970s clippings. And at first, I thought there wasn't a ton there. But by the time I surfaced, I was like, okay, I need to talk about this case. This is a story about country stardom gone wrong, baby. Not in a bad record deal way, not in a tour bus drama way, and definitely not in a campy Nashville plotline kind of way. Raina James, she couldn't handle this. Okay, not even her. Because why? This is Cult Leader Babes, and this story ends in a moida, one that we need to talk about. So let's talk about Linda Charlee Scott. Linda Scott was born March 1st, 1950 in Sunflower, Kansas, which sounds straight out of a country song already. It's sometimes listed as Clearview City, but either way, it's a tiny place near DeSoto. And music was in Linda's life from the beginning. By the time she was 6 years old, she was already singing in public, performing for audiences, and completely comfortable on stage in a way that most people never really become. She was a natural, and she wanted it. This wasn't a stage parent situation. Nobody was dragging her into the spotlight or forcing her into auditions. She really gravitated towards performing on her own. She wanted to be a star. What she didn't have was the business structure to rise to her career dreams. There were no childhood contracts, no handlers, no adults mapping out a long-term plan or building cushion around her talent. I mean, there was no label waiting in the wings. It was just Linda, singing wherever she could, figuring it out as she went. There was no viral video, nothing like that. And she never stopped. A lot of kids who start performing young sort of drift away from it in their teens. Linda didn't. She carried it straight through adolescence and into adulthood, still chasing the same goal that she'd had since she was little, a real sustainable music career. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Linda followed somewhat of a small town normcore path. She married young, twice actually, to two different men, but both marriages ended in divorce, as Tammy Wynette would say. And during that same period, she became a mother twice as well. Her first daughter, Tamara, was born around 1968 or 1969. Carmen followed a few years later around 1971 or 1972. It's unclear. But suddenly, the dream of stardom wasn't just for her anymore. Even though she was a single mother of two, she was still performing, still traveling, still grinding for opportunities, only now carrying the very real weight of childcare, rent, food, schedules, and the constant pressure of never having quite enough time or money. Every decision from where to live, which gigs to take, how long to be gone, it all had to be worked out in a way that was best for Tamara and Carmen. In terms of having a parent that is in that sort of entertainment world or show business as a whole, that's really the best you can hope for. The kids went through all of it with her. Instability, long stretches of uncertainty. And at one point, while Linda was on tour in the Southwest, a fire actually gutted her home in Kansas. Her daughters had to be rescued by a family friend, and this wasn't a glamorous version of show business that she was hoping for. This was the precarious, exhausting version. The time most quit when the going gets tough. But Linda kept going, Professionally, she took work wherever she could get it. Clubs, lounges, hotel bars, steakhouse stages. In Kansas, she became a familiar face at spots like Don D's Steakhouse and Lounge in Olathe. This kept her performing regularly and allowed her to build relationships with owners and managers and learn how to hold a room, whether people were paying attention or not. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real work and it kept her visible. Eventually, she didn't want to be another Linda Scott. There already was one in existence. So she started using the name Charlee, but kind of a feminine spelling, Charlee. Something that sounded more like a performer, like someone with a future in the industry, more original. Around the same time, she leaned fully into country and Western music, which really fit her voice, her background, her new name, and her life far better than anything she had tried before. And it seemed to work for her. In 1977, she signed with a small New York-based label called Amarama Records and recorded an album in Nashville called Standing in Your Shoes. This was the real thing. The album didn't launch her into stardom, but it was reviewed, favorably so, in the trade papers, and industry people took notice. She released several singles, and one of them, Keep Those Pillows Soft and Warm, actually moved copies. Around 10,000 of them. Might not sound huge now because of streaming, but for a country artist back then, without mainstream radio support or a major label PR machine behind her, not too shabby. People were finally listening and she was making real progress. I actually was able to find some of the singles on YouTube and I don't know what I was expecting, but I was not disappointed. I don't want to get copyright stricken on YouTube, but I really implore you guys to go listen to it. I'm scared that if I even sample a little bit of it, it's going to block this episode. But it should be heard, and I'll share clips maybe on social media, because if those get taken down, whatever. The dedication on her album says a lot about how Charlee saw her life at that point. She thanked her daughters, Tamara and Carmen, for giving me something to sing about. And she thanked George Osserman for his inspiration and support. By then, George Osserman had become central to everything in her life. He was a tax attorney who became Linda's business manager and stepped into the side of her career that she'd been handling on her own for years. Contracts, money, logistics, long-term planning. But the relationship didn't stay strictly business for long. Over time, he became her romantic partner. Multiple articles have described him as wealthy, some flat out calling him a millionaire. Others dropped hints about a South African diamond mining interest and various high-end capital ventures years earlier. George had already made national headlines for being named by the Securities and Exchange Commission as a principal promoter in the coal mining tax shelter that raised something like $20 million. He was part of that wealthy elite crowd. It drew in celebrity investors, including Elvis, and eventually triggered federal fraud allegations in which George denied any wrongdoing. But his reputation was a little shaky, to say the least. I'm not sure he was the most ethical dude. Anyway, with that kind of career support in place, she pushed harder than she ever had before. She appeared in a television special that aired in 6 major cities, including Atlanta and San Diego, and it wasn't national, but it wasn't nothing neither. Around the same time, she went out on a 6-week national tour, and that kind of stretch, it wears you down, even when you don't have kids waiting for you at home. In New York, she performed at the Lone Star Cafe, which was the country spot at the time. I mean, Willie Nelson played there, Emmylou Harris played there. If you were a serious country artist trying to be taken seriously outside of Nashville, that stage was a good one to get on. And then came what felt like a real step forward. Charlee landed a scheduled week-long engagement at the grand finale in Manhattan, set to begin on December 4th, 1978. It wasn't an opening spot either. Her name was the headliner on the calendar for the full week. Around the same time period, Charlee relocated with Tamara and Carmen to 134 Elk Avenue in New Rochelle, New York, just north of the city. Depending on the article, it was described as a 10-room, 14-room, or even 15-room Tudor-style home valued at somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000. It sat back from the road with this long, winding driveway, a big manicured lawn, and a swimming pool. I mean, what more could you want? The Beachmont neighborhood near Iona College was known for old money and large homes, tucked behind trees. It was given success, privacy, prestige, arrival, wealth, status. She'd made it, honey. And for her daughters, the move was a full reset. Tamara and Carmen enrolled at Roosevelt School. Their days shifted into something that looked, at least from the outside, stable and predictable. School routines, caregivers, a house that didn't feel temporary. But the house itself wasn't a quiet family space for long. It was already becoming something bigger and more complicated. By June of 1978, George Osserman had moved into the Elk Avenue home with Charlee and her 2 daughters. There were no real boundaries anymore. He oversaw her finances, managed her career decisions, and was now making decisions for daily life inside of the house as well. It was a lot of control. Michael Spearman, who had begun working for Charlee back in October of 1977 in a loose all-purpose role, was also part of this household. Michael was from Kansas City and moved to New York permanently in August of 1978 into a room on the 3rd floor of the Elk Avenue house. He drove Charlee to gigs, fixed things around the house, worked as a stagehand, helped transport and set up equipment. He was really whatever was needed at the moment. It wasn't really a job you clocked out of. The house was both a home and a workspace. I mean, Charlee's life had become this full operation at this point. By the fall of 1978, the household was crowded with overlapping identities. You have a single mother, essentially, 2 young daughters, a boyfriend who was also a business manager, a live-in employee, a maid, chauffeurs moving in and out. I mean, everyone under one roof, everyone tied together in one way or another to Charlee's career. And as her career was getting hotter and bigger, people close to her noticed changes. She became a lot more quiet, more withdrawn, sometimes struggling to carry on normal conversations. This was someone who had spent her life performing openly for rooms full of strangers, and yet in private, she seemed to be pulling further and further inward. There were also rumors that she had developed specific fears. Friends said that she appeared uneasy about certain rooms in the house or buildings, sometimes asked for escorts even for short distances, like walking from one part of the house to another. She wasn't dramatic about it, per se, but she would just make these small, sort of unsettling requests like, "What's going on, girl? Are you good?" Almost paranoid. A newspaper delivery boy later told reporters that she often avoided speaking altogether, handing him written notes about her payment instead. But according to her daughters, they said that their mom was just trying to protect her voice, which, sure, that makes sense. People go on vocal rest all the time. None of it on its own sounded like a crisis, right? Nothing looked other than calm and stable. But whatever was happening inside the Elk Avenue house in the fall of 1978, it wasn't calm and it wasn't stable. Whatever was going on blew up on November 9th of 1978. That evening, Charlee returned home late. It was a Thursday night, sometime close to midnight. She had just come back from the road and she was exhausted in the very specific way only touring can make you feel. She didn't want to unpack. Her suitcases were left half open in her bedroom, clothes still inside, exactly where she dropped them. Who cares? It had been a packed day. Okay. Earlier that afternoon, Charlee and George Osserman had actually gotten engaged. Was it love? Was it a career move? We don't really know. Who's to say? According to press reports at the time, George planned to give her a $1 million diamond belt. Yes, a belt intended as a publicity stunt tied to her upcoming Manhattan engagement at the grand finale. An engagement for an engagement. Very on brand for the late 70s. But that engagement at the grand finale was never going to happen. Because in the early hours of November 10th, 1978, 28-year-old Linda Charlee Scott was killed. At some time during the night, while she slept in her bedroom, she was attacked. According to later medical testimony, she was struck 7 times in the head with a baseball bat. The blows were forceful enough to fracture her skull and cause massive brain injuries. At some point, she lifted her left hand in what was almost certainly a reflex, like an instinctive attempt to protect herself. And the bones in the back of that hand were crushed. I mean, fucking brutal. Devastating. She fought, and she fought hard. The medical examiner testified that the injuries were catastrophic and that she likely died within about 5 minutes. There was no evidence that she ever got out of bed, no sign that she moved through the room or tried to flee. Whatever happened was fast, cold-blooded, and entirely one-sided. After that, the house went quiet. Hours passed. Later that afternoon, around 4:00 p.m., Tamara and Carmen came home from school. Tamara was 10 years old at the time, Carmen just 7. They went upstairs looking for their mom and they found her in the bedroom. The exact details shift slightly depending on the account. Some reports say she was lying face down on the bed. Others place her on the bedroom floor, but every version agrees on one thing. There was blood, a lot of it. According to multiple articles, her body was lying in a pool of blood. Those poor girls, what a nightmare. What a nightmare. After the girls found her, they ran and they told a maid who was in the house, and authorities were called immediately. When police arrived alongside emergency personnel at the Elk Avenue home, they stepped into a scene that didn't make sense at first glance. It didn't look like a burglary like they'd expected. There were no obvious signs of forced entry. The house hadn't been ransacked. Nothing appeared stolen. There was just a woman dead in her bedroom. But why? By nightfall, the quiet Beachmont house was sealed off with police tape, and Linda Scott's life and belongings were being broken down into evidence bags and written reports. As far as suspects went, investigators said they were keeping their options open. They obviously questioned George Osserman. They spoke with the maid and chauffeurs who had access to the property. They contacted former boyfriends. They reached out to both of Charlie's ex-husbands and confirmed that each of them was on the West Coast at the time of the killing. No one was publicly named as a suspect. No one was publicly cleared either. As one police source put it bluntly at the time, we're ruling nobody out. There was a lot of people around her at that time, and not to mention she was this rising star. In those first few days after the murder of Charlee Scott, the investigation felt scattered. But that uncertainty didn't last long. Within 3 days, attention began to narrow in onto Michael Spearman, Mr. Do-It-All. He's the one who lived in the house. He knew the layout of the house. He knew the schedules, the routines. He had access to everything, and none of that worked in his favor. Police questioned him repeatedly. And finally, after several rounds of interrogation, he confessed. According to police, he told them he had planned to carry out the murder. In statements that would later become the backbone of the prosecutor's case, he said Charlie had treated him like a slave. He claimed that she had been unfair to his mother by firing her. She had also, worked in the household at one point, being a cook and doing some of the cleaning. He accused her of mistreating her children. He said that she cheated on her fiance, and even told police that, in his mind, killing her would be the best thing for everybody. So in other words, he fucking hated her and apparently took it upon himself to handle things. Michael Spearman was arrested and formally charged with second-degree murder along with possession of a dangerous weapon. His confession was admitted into evidence almost immediately, and shortly after, police announced that they had recovered the alleged murder weapon, the baseball bat. It was found hidden behind boxes in a storage area near Michael Spearman's room on the third floor of the house. Detectives later testified that he himself had led them straight to it. Once Michael was arrested, the case spread fast in the press, and almost instantly it started to warp, like a sick game of telephone. One of the first problems was basic identity. Some early coverage mixed Linda Scott up with the other Linda Scott, a much more famous pop singer from the early 1960s who had earned over $500,000 as a teenager and was still alive at the time. Reporters had to scramble to clarify that there was a different woman entirely, but by then, the confusion had already fueled interest in the case. As more and more details slowly unrolled, the media zeroed in on the most sensational parts of Charlie's life: the house, the money, the engagement announced literally one day before her death. It was strange. Articles kept repeating the value of the Elk Avenue home, describing it as a sprawling estate, affluent, excessive. The rumored $1 million diamond belt came up again and again, and slowly the story drifted away from Linda, or Charlie, who she actually was as a victim, and became more about the wealth, the glamour, the private life that surrounded her, the life that had gone dark behind closed doors. Some outlets pushed it even further. One commentary column openly referenced attorney Ellis Rubin. By the late 1970s, Rubin was already infamous for representing Ronnie Zamora, a Florida teenager who murdered his elderly neighbor in 1977. Rubin's defense in that case was that Zamora had been so saturated with television violence that it warped his sense of reality, and it became known as what's called the TV violence defense. It failed in court, but it made national headlines. The columnist floated the idea that Spearman's crime might be in the same category. Reportedly, this came from a piece in Jet magazine that claimed that Michael Spearman was just imitating a murder that he'd seen on Starsky and Hutch, a hugely popular crime show at the time. According to that report, Spearman allegedly said that he beat Charlee in a manner similar to a scene from the show. It was sensational, it was creepy, and it became part of the actual evidence. By the time the case reached trial in May of 1979, the tone shifted back to something much colder and more planned, more calculated. The trial was held in White Plains, with Judge Jared E. Delaney presiding. A jury of 8 men and 4 women was selected, and proceedings began on May 14th, and for the first time since the murder, everything narrowed back down to what could actually be proven in a courtroom, not what had been speculated about in headlines. The prosecution leaned hard on Michael Spearman's confession. Jurors heard police testify that Spearman admitted to planning the killing and carrying it out himself. The medical examiner took the stand and laid out the injuries, including the 7 blows to the head, a broken hand sustained while trying to shield herself, and trauma so severe that death would have occurred within minutes. Blood evidence was introduced showing that both Charlee and Michael Spearman had type A positive blood. Officers testified that Michael Spearman had led them directly to the baseball bat hidden near his room, and the defense pushed back harder. Spearman's attorney, Irving Kreppel, argued that the confession couldn't be trusted. He claimed that Spearman had been frightened, pressured, and psychologically worn down during questioning. No, come on. He suggested evidence may have been planted, and he even made a huge claim that Michael Spearman had been under the influence of sodium pentothal, the so-called truth serum, when he confessed. He also called Michael Spearman's sister to testify, attempting to humanize him and poke holes in the prosecution's theory of events. After both sides rested, the jury was sequestered and sent off to deliberate. They were left to weigh the confession, the physical evidence, and 2 very different explanations for what happened inside of the Elk Avenue house. The verdict came back guilty. Michael Spearman was convicted of second-degree murder and possession of a dangerous weapon. At sentencing later that summer, Judge Delaney imposed the maximum sentence of 25 years to life. From the bench, he described the killing as brutal, clearly planned. He also reminded the room that the damage could never be undone, stressing that Charlee's daughters had effectively been left without parents. And according to a lot of different articles that came out afterwards, it's true. They really were. At least during the trial, they were living with George Osserman. They were all victims in this. Charlee Scott's quiet funeral was held at the Frank E. Campbell Funeral Chapel in Manhattan. And according to findagrave.com, she was buried in Acre Cemetery in Sherman, Grayson County, Texas. According to a couple of YouTube comments that I saw on the songs, Michael Spearman only served 25 years because he admitted that it was, in fact, premeditated. I couldn't find any other info about a release or an update, but I do know that after her death, her second album, Midnight Madness, was released. A posthumous arrival. Another layer of what could have been added to an already heavy story. It's just so sad. Just like that, this case settled into a strange kind of country music legacy and memory. Parts of this were reminiscent to me of the story of Connie Converse, if you'll recall, which is probably one of, I think, the most beloved episodes of Cult Leader to this day. Another woman that was on their way to making it big time and had so much potential and had so much and just possessed so much talent. And then their lives were, well, presumably for Connie, but absolutely for Linda or Charlee, cut drastically short. There really isn't a ton of information out there about this case, which surprises me in some capacity because she was really in the midst of making a name for herself, but also she was hanging out with George Osserman. He was a wealthy guy. Who knows if he was allegedly, this is just pure speculation, but I'm like, was he quieting papers down at the time? I don't know. But it really is so sad. A life cut way too short. And hopefully, you know, for her daughters, they were able to find a path in life and heal from such a tragic loss. Your heart just goes out to them. What also really strikes me about this story and what compelled me to want to talk about it is because there's this inner dialogue that I think we have a tendency to ignore or sometimes brush off as anxiety. I think when you have anxiety, it's really hard to tell sometimes, like, is this my intuition? Is my gut telling me something? Or am I just being anxious? And you got to find that balance. And I truly think there's a reason that she was feeling so standoffish in the time leading up to her death, if that is in fact true. But that needing an escort to go across the house, things like that, it really makes you believe. I mean, we do all have this natural intuition inside of us that we need to follow. Hopefully this doesn't get copyright stricken, but I'll let Charlee take us out this week. Goodbye.
There's a whole lot of gimmicks that a woman can use to keep a man satisfied. She can paint it up and curl it up and better words flat, but that won't keep him home at night. If you listen close to what I say, well, you can wake up beside him every day. It takes a little doing, but what I'm gonna say is right. You got to keep